Hey YouTube, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we are going to be talking about travel. It's been a while since I've been able to talk about travel because, you know, since it took so long to get my whole visa immigration process sorted out this year, there were like a good 6 months where you didn't see any Tia Taylor travel content because I have just been kind of stuck here. Now, I don't want to use the word stuck. I consider myself very lucky of all the places in the world to be stuck. I have to admit that Italy is a pretty good place to be stuck in. But anyways, I finally got my visa stuff sorted out and I've just been going. It was Nigeria, and then I went to California for a business trip, and then last weekend I went to Budapest, Hungary by myself. Now, I wasn't actually supposed to go by myself. I was actually supposed to go with a friend, but at the last moment my friend got very sick. I was like, you know what, it's fine, but I already paid for the ticket, I already paid for the hotel, so I guess I'm just going to go to Budapest, Hungary by myself. It was quite an experience, and I thought that it could be useful to make a video for any future travelers, whether they be black, whether they be female, whether they be black female, or just any random person going to Hungary alone, just to give you guys a little bit of an idea of what to expect and, you know, maybe some tips on how to prepare yourself for the trip. First thing, let's get the elephant out of the room and talk about racism. For my followers and viewers that aren't black, I have to say that as a black person living in this world, or a black person coming from the West at least, one of the first things you think about when you're picking a new country to go visit is, are they racist? Like, you can see, one of my first most popular videos on this channel was me talking about being black in Italy, because it's just a thing that your mind immediately goes to. Now, I can say as a black female living in Europe for the past 5 years that my view on racism is that racism in the United States and North and South America, you know, the former slave colonies, societies that were built on caste systems that were based on race, color of your skin, racism there is very different from how it plays out in other parts of the world. In Europe, I have found racism to be, first of all, very different depending on which country you're in. It's going to be different in the UK, where there is a very multicultural society, as opposed to a place like Italy where there's not as much of a multicultural society, which is going to be different than a place like Hungary, where there was basically no black people. I found that racism in America is a lot more like deep-rooted. Even in the way we think as Americans, race is always kind of in the back of your mind, whereas in Europe that's not exactly the case. I find that there are some factors to you as a person that really outweigh your race in Europe, which could be your nationality, which could be how much money you have or how much money you are perceived to have. In Italy especially, because that's where I have the most experience, how much money you have and how much money you're perceived to have and what nationality you are really outweigh your race. Even though I am black, I am also an American, and I went to a very good school here and I have a very good job, so even though I'm not Bill Gates, I'm not poor here. And when you look at me, you see that I'm not poor. And even before I started working, and even when I was actually poor, people would look at me and just kind of assume that I was rich. And that played out into me really not ever being touched by racism in this country. The one time that I've experienced what I think was racism, I'm like 99% sure it was racism, but you know, there's that, the person didn't say this is because you're black, so we'll never truly know, happened like 2 weeks ago in Rome. And I have a whole video on that because I had to make a video about the first time I was in a racist situation in Italy. Racism is really different, and you're gonna see that different factors affect how you're treated by people differently, and it varies all around the world. I just got back from Africa, and that's a whole nother ball game. That's a whole different society where race plays a whole different thing. As I can say from my experience in Europe, racism is very different, and coming back to the specifics of Budapest and Hungary, I didn't experience any racism in the one weekend I was there. I think that racism can be broken down even more into like the racism you would see as a tourist versus the racism you would see as a black person living there, which are two different things. Racism you would see as a tourist is like, if you see racism as a tourist, then that country is probably like hella racist. If you can notice it in a short period of time doing really simple things like eating out at a restaurant or going to sightsee, then that country is probably hella racist. There's another type of racism that you wouldn't see as a tourist. There's a type of racism like, do black people and people of color find jobs in that place? Do black people or people of color have the opportunity to live a good life in that place? And that's a different type of racism. Coming back to Italy, because it's been a while since I've touched on these things. When I first got here, since I didn't experience any racism as a tourist, I immediately came out and said, you know, that it was like this for everybody. And then living here for a much longer period of time, I realized that things were a bit more complicated. I will say that again, I don't feel like your race has a huge impact on your ability to create a good life here or find a good job, but a bunch of other factors do. One huge factor is geography. Are you in Milan or are you in some bumfuck town in the middle of nowhere? Another factor would be your education, and education is almost tied into class and how much money you have. Were you able to pay to go to one of the best private universities, or did you go to a regular university? All of these things will affect how easy it is for you to find a job and therefore have a good life in Italy. And from my experience, the color of my skin wasn't a huge factor. And in fact, I have a lot of black friends in Milan, and if you follow me on social media, you'll see them quite often, and they all work. They all are just like me. Those are two different levels of racism. I know this video is about Budapest, but I just felt like I should update you guys on life in Italy as well, because I haven't talked about these things in a while. So in Budapest, obviously I couldn't have been able to see the actual real life, what it would be like to live there as a black person, but I did see how they treated me as a tourist. And I have to say, as a tourist, I always felt like I was pretty taken care of. I always felt like people were very attentive to me. When I did ask questions, they were answered in English, and I never felt disrespected, which would be, you know, your first sign of, oh my gosh, are they racist? So, I mean, the big answer to, can you go to Budapest as a black person? What's racism like there? And I would say, in Budapest, the capital of Hungary, a big city, in the center of that big city, you're not going to experience any racism as a black tourist. Now, what is it like living there as a black person? I don't know. Moving on from racism and just going into solo travel, how easy was it to solo travel? Well, first of all, in terms of being able to find your way around as a person alone in a country where you don't speak the language, because obviously they speak Hungarian, and Hungarian has a different alphabet, and it's all very, very different. But some countries like Hungary or Greece, they'll have everything written out in Hungarian, and then another language, and then English. And I guess since a lot of English-speaking people go to Hungary, they have everything written out in Hungarian, and then German, and then English. It's not always like this. It's not always going to be English, or there will be a lot of languages above English, such as, note. In Hungary, it was English, and in Hungary, most of the people that I spoke to in the service sector knew how to speak English really well. I had done a lot of research before going to Hungary by myself, and one of the things that they said was that they weren't very good at speaking English, but I didn't find this to be true. I found that anybody that I came into contact with that was working in the service sector spoke English quite well, and I was able to easily move along. In terms of transportation, because this was another thing, I had done quite a bit of research, and I was warned beforehand about things like taxi scams, and the fact that if you just hop into a random taxi on the street in Budapest, you could be at the risk of them overcharging you or doing things with the meter so that you end up paying more. And so I was kind of warned to either take a official taxi, or later on I found the use of apps to be that's what people that live in Hungary do, and that's what I started doing by the end of my trip, is using an app called Bolt. It's basically like Uber, but for taxis, and that way you see when the taxi's coming, you know where they are. Once you're in the taxi, you can watch the meter right there, and then all the payment can be electronic through the app, or you can pay in cash, and it's very hassle-free and easy. So that's how I was getting around. In terms of money, another thing, when I first touched down in Budapest, the first thing that I did was I went to an ATM and I withdrew cash, because in Italy, you should do that. In Italy, unless you're like in Milan, you're not going to see that Italy is a very like not cash dependent society. If you want to get a taxi, if you want to get a coffee, these things like this require cash and having some cash on hand, especially outside of a big city. So I was expecting it to be like that in Budapest. I don't really know why. I thought, well, if Italy doesn't use cash, they must not use cash either. I mean, if Italy doesn't use card, they must not use card either. Well, in the end, they definitely did use card for just about everything. Everything, like you could pay for taxi in card, you could pay for a coffee in card. The first thing that they ask you when you come up to the payment, when you come up to the cash register is, are you going to pay in cash or are you going to pay in card? And so I went up to the ATM and I withdrew money, and I just wouldn't suggest anybody do this because they use a different currency as well. They don't use the euro, but they use the Hungarian franc. And when I went to the ATM, of course, you see those values and you don't know what that equivalent actually is. And then you have people waiting behind you in line. And if you try to look at the currency converter, like it's just a mess. And so what I did was I withdrew the smallest amount of money, which was like 64,000. That ended up being like 200 euros. It was like 180 euros, and I didn't really have intentions of spending 180 euros in that weekend. And in fact, I didn't end up using 180 euros, so just don't withdraw money. If you don't live there, if you're just going as a tourist, you really don't need to have the francs. Everywhere you go in the center, all the tourist spots take card, and it's just a lot easier, so you don't end up like taking out more money than you're actually going to need, but you'll end up having to change in the end, which you'll have to pay to change back to your currency. It was really interesting though, because this was one of the ways where I could say they weren't racist to tourists, is because, you know, one of the ways that people mistreat you, whether it be because you are of a different skin color or even because you're a different nationality, is that they'll try to take advantage of you and they'll try to scam you. And when I went to one restaurant and I was paying and I was not used to using this money, which you have like 10,000 of their money in your hand, and what is 10,000? For me, 10,000 is like a lot of money in euros. And so I was paying and I got confused with the bills, and I ended up giving them like 80 euros to pay for a 20 euro meal, and the waiter immediately said, oh no, this is too much. And then he started like explaining the different notes to me, and it's like, see, somebody else could have taken advantage of you, could have just taken the money, and then that would have been it, but they weren't like that. And so it was one of those ways to say, one, be careful with withdrawing money. It would have been better to just use a card. And two, I wasn't mistreated just because I was this young black foreigner that clearly didn't know anything. Another pro about traveling into Budapest alone is that it's a small city in the sense that you can really see a lot of the tourist attractions in like 2 or 3 days. When I was researching Budapest, I had a list of all the places that I wanted to go, and I really was able to hit most of them in just a day and a half, and I left pretty happy with myself. So if you're looking for a nice city to visit on maybe just a weekend or maybe a short break just to see something new, then I would definitely suggest Budapest. It was a nice way to get like introduced to Eastern European culture and kind of like, you know, dip your toe into the water, because as a city, it was pretty friendly and open to tourists, and it was a very tourist friendly city. It was a very woman friendly city as well, because there were times when, I mean like every night actually, that I was walking out alone at night, whether it be to walk to a restaurant or whether it be to meet up with friends, because I did eventually meet up with some friends one night. I got really, really lucky, and one of my American friends who went to school with me here in Italy, but moved back to America, you got that? Her roommate in one of the years when she was studying was from Hungary. And so when I told her that I was in Hungary alone, she was able to just make a Facebook Messenger group with the two of us and link us up together. And then her former roommate showed up and showed me around the town for the night and gave me like all these tips. It was one of those moments where I was just like, only in Europe, man. Like, how does that happen? You know, you're not even from here, you're not here anymore. And then the fact that she was just like, yeah, let me show you around. I don't know if that would happen in America. Would that happen in America? Let me know in the comments down below. I met up with this girl who was a friend of a friend, and she took me out to see the Budapest nightlife, which was really, really, like, it was good. It had a good vibe. Drinks were like 3,000 francs, and then of course less for shots. They had different types of music going and playing, and just the overall vibe was very cool, because it's not everywhere that you go and you go to a nightclub in every country and you're just gonna have the right vibe that I'm talking about. Budapest had a very nice nightlife vibe. In that sense, that I felt really, really safe as a woman, and I felt not threatened as a minority. So Budapest in Hungary, I feel like, is one of those places where, especially as I don't know, maybe as an American, I wouldn't really think to go. I would always think, ooh, Eastern Europe, maybe that isn't the best place for somebody like me. But I was very pleasantly surprised, and I would love to go again. This is also a point I hear people cover a lot when it comes to Budapest. Budapest was not expensive, but it wasn't exactly cheap either. I would say that it's just a little bit cheaper than Milan. And so of course everything is relative, because if you're coming from New York, Milan would be cheap. But since I'm coming from Milan and it was just a little bit less expensive, for me it was still, you know, kind of expensive. With all these different topics covered, I hope that you guys were able to, you know, get a nice little, should I go to Budapest? Should I not go to Budapest? And think, yeah, I should go to Budapest. I hope this video was helpful, and be sure to like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I talk about cultural differences and my life as a young Black American woman living in Italy, and just, yeah, that's me. I don't normally do that, but this time I felt the need to do that. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, I will see you guys in my next one. Mwah.